This is Mike on Cars and Bikes, and today we're talking about brake pads, specifically the ones behind me. These are the Wilwood Smart Brake Compound. Now, I've tried lots of different kinds. I have some old BP10s here. You can see they're quite a bit used. They're in reasonable shape. Also, for my next track day, I have the BP30s. These are brand new. Never really been out of the box. And you can see they look similar. They're the same pad size, just different compounds. So I have the BP10s, which I took off, the BP30s, which I haven't used yet, and the BP20s, which I've used for my front brake pads for a couple of years now. Today we're going to talk about them. So I started with the BP20s, and I thought they were a great pad, especially for the street. For the first maybe 1,000, 2,000 miles, I got great response. Canyon driving, kind of aggressive street driving that you may be doing, they work great. Eventually I did a couple track days, and they held up fairly well for the first 1 or 2 track days. But then they started squeaking on the street. And also after a couple of very heavy duty track days, I ended up kind of jarring the pads, which scratched the rotors. I've had these rotors turned, and you can see, maybe you can hear that they're very smooth right now. I'll show an old picture of what they look like before I had that done. You can see as the pad degraded, it fell apart and then imparted that rough surface area onto the rest of the rotor. And so after a couple track days, the BP20s kind of fell on their face. And you would get the squeaking when you had light engagement on the brake pedal, which is very annoying if you're going to the grocery store. And so I thought maybe it's just the compounds are too harsh. And so that's when I got the BP10s. And with the BP10s, they started out great for the grocery store, and then for canyon driving, they ended up basically falling on their face. So what I would end up with is brake pad fade. So the brake pedal would be firm, but I would go to stop, and the car just simply wouldn't stop. I could press harder and harder on a firm brake pedal, but the car wouldn't stop anymore. And so I said the BP10s they're okay for grocery store getting. I thought they would never squeak, but after wearing them through in the canyons a little too much, they too started to squeak. So what it seems like is once the pads start to break down, they'll start to squeak under light engagement, which is what you would have as you pull up to a stop sign or go through your neighborhood, and that's not really ideal. And so for the next setup, I've decided to try to standardize on BP20s for when I'm just driving around. Went to the grocery store today, do canyon driving, and other non-track related things. I believe these BP20s should be perfectly fine for that kind of work. And now that I have this new garage, I'm going to put on these BP30s specifically for the track. I'll do another video on the BP30s during the track day, or maybe going there or something like that. Now the BP20s never really failed me on the track. They would eventually get annoying on the street and get squeaky. But the BP20s I thought were great on the track. And so I'm expecting the BP30s to be even better. I almost always bleed the brakes right before the track day. And so with the new Wilwood brake kit, I've never really seen really bad brake fade or the pedal going flat, which is a really good feeling, especially on the racetrack. And the next issue has been the tires. I can stomp the brakes and I'll lock up the front tires pretty quick. And so there's a new present sitting for me in the back. Now, if we compare the BP10s to the BP20s, to the BP30s, you can listen to what I'm saying. Also, switch over and show what Wilwood says about these brake pads. Let's go back to the studio. Back in the studio, we have Wilwood's marketing materials in front of us. And they talk about the SmartPads with BP10, BP20, BP30, and also BP40, which I haven't tried yet. We looked at the BP10s. We decided they're okay for going grocery store, not great for canyon driving. BP20s are great for canyon driving, do well on the track, but eventually will kind of give up. Will also eat through your rotors if they do. The BP30s are what we're trying next. We look at some of the information Wilwood provides about these compounds. We start with the BP10 and BP20. So it's the red line and the dotted line. So the BP10 has the highest coefficient of friction at the very coldest temperature they measure at 100 F. And I feel like you can also feel this as well. When you're starting up the car in the morning, backing out of the driveway in the first turns around the street. The BP10s definitely had kind of the best friction, so I didn't have to push as hard on the pedal initially. But after you could go a mile or so, the pads will generally warm up for the BP20s. The BP20s do start out with a lower coefficient of friction, so you have to push harder on the pedal in order to actually stop. But once they get up to temperature, you'll see that the BP20s will go all the way up to about 900 F before they start fading away. 900 F is really hot, and it is fairly difficult to figure out exactly how hot your brake pads are getting. But after you hit about 900, it'll taper off. Now, the graph on the BP10 should be no surprise why they give up on canyon driving. And so I would assume that when I do my canyon driving in the C7 Corvette that weighs about 3,500 pounds, the temperatures are getting up probably above 5 or 6 or 700 degrees F. And that's when you would experience pad fade, which I saw basically immediately in the canyons. Now, if I jump up to the BP30s, which confusingly isn't on the same graph, but this is the dark line up here. And at 100 degrees F, you can see that it's at roughly 0.54, which is a lot higher than most of the other ones ever. And so I have a feeling this BP30 will be more abrasive towards the rotors. In addition to being more abrasive on the rotors, I feel like it should get up to temperature and have a very long life. You see, after we hit about 500 F, it has roughly the same coefficient of friction all the way up to 1200 or 1300 degrees. So much more than the roughly 900 on the BP20s. And so I'm expecting on the track that this is going to be great. I'm also expecting that as soon as I put on the BP30s and back down the driveway, go to a stop sign, they're going to squeak basically immediately. And so I think the BP30s are going to be a great track pad, but not great on the street. And so my plan is to swap them before and after. So for the track day, I'll use the 30s, and for the regular driving, I'll use the 20s. And so there you have it. If you were looking for Wilwood brake pads, I hope this video was helpful. Signing off, this is Mike on Cars and Bikes.